When God became man and dwelt among humanity, he instituted a church to dispense his grace through the 7 sacraments. One of these sacraments the church today calls Holy Orders, a sacrament which replaces the priesthood of the Levites and the line of Aaron with a new priesthood rooted in God himself. As the 7th chapter of Hebrews says, Jesus became the guarantee of a better covenant. He, because he remains forever, has a priesthood that does not pass away. Because this sacramental ordination of the priesthood is based upon Jesus Christ, it leaves an everlasting character upon the soul. In other words, just like the other sacraments such as matrimony or baptism, the character of the sacrament of Holy Orders leaves an eternal imprint upon the soul, which cannot be totally blotted out even by sin. The Code of Canon Law expresses it this way, saying, "Once validly received, sacred ordination never becomes invalid." If this is the case, then what do we mean when we speak of a priest becoming laicized, and what are the reasons that might lead to laicization? What the average person would normally call laicization, the Code of Canon Law refers to simply as the loss of the clerical state, and it can fall into 3 main categories. The first instance of losing the clerical state is similar to the process for annulment, and that it refers to an investigation by the Church which determines if a priest was validly ordained to begin with. In this case, if the judicial power of the Church determines that a person was never validly ordained as a priest, the Church can judge the individual as lacking the sacrament of Holy Orders, and so the judicial process is merely a formal recognition of an absence of sacramental character. The Code of Canon Law describes such a situation, saying, "A cleric loses the clerical state, in the first case, by a judicial sentence or administrative decree, which declares the invalidity of sacred ordination." An example of this sort of invalidity is when, in 2020, the Archdiocese of Detroit found that one of its priests was not actually a priest, because when he was baptized, the wrong baptismal formula was used, meaning he never became a Christian in the first place, thus making him ineligible for the sacrament of Holy Orders. In cases like this, where ordination fails because of an error and not because of any malicious action on the part of the priest, the situation can be rectified if the bishop opts to simply repeat the priest's baptism, his confirmation, and his ordination, so that he can become a true priest and regain the clerical state, as was the case here. However, the consequences of the invalidity of an ordination remain a very serious matter, even when no one directly attempts to harm. This is because an invalid ordination means that any sacrament that the priest attempted to perform, as long as it was uniquely tied to his capacity as a priest, would become invalid. For instance, every time that the individual who, at the time, presumed themselves to be a priest, attempted to offer the sacrament of confession, it would be rendered null and void, and so any layperson who confessed their sin to him would be obliged to confess them again to a true priest to receive the graces of the sacrament of confession. Other sacraments, such as baptism, would not need to be repeated, since technically anyone has the power to confer the sacrament of baptism, though lay people are only permitted to do so in an emergency. The second way a priest can lose the clerical state is if he was validly ordained, yet, because of some serious moral error, the Church removed his faculties to exercise the priestly ministry. An obvious example of this sort of removal is when a priest engages in unrepentant sexual sin, as discussed in Canon 1395, which says, "A sin against the 6th commandment of the Decalogue which causes scandal is to be punished with suspension." To this, other penalties can progressively be added if, after a warning, he persists in the offense, until eventually he can be dismissed from the clerical state. Even if a priest is dismissed from the clerical state, whether it's for sexual sin or some other grave offense against his duty as a priest, he is still obliged to follow the law of celibacy unless specifically exempted by Rome, as Canon 291 notes. Nonetheless, the man retains the character of a priest upon his soul, and because this character can never be removed, he is permitted to perform the sacrament of confession if someone is in danger of death. The third case of dismissal from the clerical state is when someone was validly ordained, but has their faculties removed via Rome. The Code of Canon Law says, "A cleric loses the clerical state, in the third case, by rescript of the Apostolic See, which grants it to deacons only for grave causes and to presbyters only for most grave causes." Although similar to the second case, this third category is distinct because it is not directly connected with punishment, and may result from the deacon or priest themselves requesting laicization, as with priests who desire to leave the clerical state to become married. However, the Holy See can always deny this request if they do not find the request to be serious enough, in which case the duties proper to the clerical state remain in place. While these 3 cases are broadly applicable for the Latin Rite churches, which are the majority of global Catholicism, the rules regarding the clerical state can have slightly different application when talking about the Eastern Catholic churches, which tend not to emphasize clerical celibacy, so long as the marriage itself was prior to the ordination, after which point marriage is not permitted. In cases where someone was married and later became a priest, an Eastern priest is dispensed from the discipline of celibacy and may continue to engage in sexual relations with their wife. Although this tradition of married clergy is fully legitimate, even among the Eastern churches, it remains always most exalted among vocations to consecrate oneself to a celibate life. As the Ecumenical Council of Trent noted, if anyone saith that the marriage state is to be placed above the state of virginity or of celibacy, and that it is not better and more blessed to remain in virginity or in celibacy than to be united in matrimony, let him be anathema. Thanks for watching this video on the laicization process. My next video will be about how to distinguish between monks, priests, and religious friars, and how they overlap with one another.